Have you guys ever had that one really special player? Not special in a good way. Special in the kind of way that makes you kind of want to quit DMing forever and makes you question all the decisions that led you to running D&D in the first place. The kind of player who, for example, asks to instantly kill all the enemies because they can just cast Create or Destroy Water in their lungs and boom, all enemies dead. And when you say, no, that doesn't work for the many obvious reasons it doesn't work, they respond with, what about my creative freedom? What about player agency? And then you sigh and want to just quit. Yeah, this is, in case you haven't noticed, something that really, really annoys me and something I've joked about before. So why am I talking about it on Tabletop Tavern Tips now? Well, recently I was browsing the big D&D subreddit, the one with like 3 million followers or something like that, and saw on the top, it wasn't character art like I was expecting and honestly kind of hoping for. It was instead a discussion about this very thing. And hey, we love a good discussion here. So today, we're going to be talking about creative freedom, player agency, and when a dungeon master should just tell you to stop. Without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so what was this thread about? Basically, it was a dungeon master asking, nay, begging for help with a certain player who kept on asking to use spells in... Okay, creative ways is a little bit generous. The player was asking to break certain spells, essentially, change the way they work in subtle but meaningful ways. For example, as many of you know, Eldritch Blast, with the Repelling Blast Warlock feature, allows a Warlock to push creatures away. This player wanted to change it. Instead of horizontal pushing, it's vertical pushing. So now, instead of the creature going this way, they go up, and now take fall damage as well as fall prone. This is obviously a major change to how the spell works. And when the Dungeon Master said, no, you can't do that, the player got very, very upset. They did this with the Fly spell, the Control Water spell, lots of different spells, and when the Dungeon Master kept on telling them to stop bending the rules of these spells, the player responded with, all we do in your combat is use basic attacks. We never do anything creative, and that's on you. And you know what? I understand where that player is coming from. It's a two-pronged issue here. D&D combats, well, sometimes it can be kind of not great. It's a problem we've talked about before, and this is coming from a guy who loves combat in Dungeons & Dragons. I do love running combats, but number one, there's a lot of things that I add into combat to make it more fun for me to run, and number two, I do understand from the player end the frustration of just saying, I attack over and over and over again, especially if you're a Warlock and you're often just casting Eldritch Blast. However, there is another problem here. The other side of this is a balance problem. This player wants to shift the way spells work in a way that makes them way too powerful. It's like that Create or Destroy Water example from before. A first level transmutation spell insta-killing anything that can't breathe water is really dumb. Eldritch Blast being able to not just do the amount of damage that it does at range, but also being able to fling enemies into the air, do an extra 2d6 damage per 10-foot fallen, and knock enemies prone is way too much for a cantrip. These sort of small changes may not seem like a big deal to a player in the moment, but to a dungeon master who's thinking about game balance, they are a huge issue. And this DM was well within their rights to say no. However, instead of just taking that no, the player decided to invoke something that I am quickly seeing become the new it's what my character would do. Player agency and creative freedom. Now, all of these three things, it's what my character would do, player agency, creative freedom, they're all not bad. In fact, I think that most of these things are good things that make Dungeons & Dragons and all tabletop role-playing games what they are today. I mean, if you don't have it's what my character would do, there's not going to be much role-playing. If you don't have creative freedom, then, I mean, it doesn't really feel like a tabletop role-playing game in the first place. Player agency is a big part of what gets people so invested into any sort of TTRPG. It is important. So what's the problem here? The problem is when players use these as a blunt force tool to just get whatever they want. That is the issue. With It's What My Character Would Do, it's roleplay based. With the creative freedom thing, it's a balance issue in combat, and I'm sure in other things as well. Players asking for spells or features to do way more than they were intended to, just for the sake of creative freedom, just for the sake of, oh, I want to win, is a problem. A legitimate one in a lot of games where you want there to be some challenge. Just allowing a cantrip to completely cripple enemies with extra damage and prone, probably not a good idea. And like I said before, the DM was well within their right to say this. So how do you handle this player? They've invoked something that is important in Dungeons & Dragons. Creative freedom, player agency, these are important things. So how do you deal with it? We'll get to that. Don't worry. We're all about solutions here. But before that, we do need to talk about another problem. Because all of these issues we've talked about before, they're ignoring one big thing. They're ignoring that this might not be done in good faith. Look, sometimes players make requests or ask for certain items, abilities, buffs, nerfs, etc., and they just don't understand the wider implications of it. Sometimes the Dungeon Master invokes some of these things and doesn't understand the wider implications of it because we're all just human and we make mistakes. But when a player or a DM refuses to take 2 seconds to think about these sort of things, there is another issue on display here. A lack of care for everyone else at the table. Look, using Eldritch Blast or Create or Destroy Water in these ways, they're gonna do a lot of damage to a Dungeon Master's game. I mean, DMs work so hard to balance combat, or at least you probably should work at least a little bit hard to balance combat, but what's the point if somebody can just cast a Create or Destroy Water spell and anything that can't breathe water is screwed? There's no point. That's the answer. Unless you just use DM Fiat and make everything capable of breathing water, I don't really know what you could do if you allow that ruling into your game. That's why, you don't. Same thing goes for that Eldritch Blast thing. But it's not just on the DM, it's also on the players. The other players in the game, what are they going to do? If the Warlock has such power, what's the point of having your fighter? The fighter can't do all of that, and the fighter probably needs to be in melee. That is frustrating for everyone else at the table. The problem is, some people don't care. Sometimes people make these requests in bad faith. It is the core of the original problem. It's what my character would do. Role-play actions taken in bad faith using the justification of in-character behavior to just hand-wave away any sort of problems. But here we see it in another form. Players using creative freedom as an excuse to become unreasonably powerful in combat, not only breaking the game for the DM, but often for the other players. This whole group dynamic is something that I don't often see referenced in these events. A lot of time, people just talk about the rules problems. Like, yeah, straight up, Eldritch Blast does not work like that. It doesn't send enemies up vertically. It sends enemies horizontally. That's how the spell works. But beyond just the spell doesn't work like that, even if the spell did work like that, I'm sure there are plenty of broken spell combos out there that you could list in the comments. Even if it does work like that, even if that's technically how it was designed, the other players are still at the table. The actual problem with this isn't necessarily just the rules don't say that. The actual problem is how it affects everyone else there. And the problem beyond that is that some people do not care. So, yet again, now we've listed the two main issues. The issues of bending the rules, the issues with using creative freedom as a blunt force tool, and the issues of ignoring the other people at the table and what they might want in favor of just being ultra powerful using broken spell or ability combos. So, what's the solution? Well, number one, the solution is to find a table that works for you. There is an obvious thing I haven't talked about yet, and that is legitimate min-maxing. Characters that are ultra powerful, not through bending the rules or through some BS creative solution like exploiting certain spell descriptions, but through legitimate means of becoming an ultra powerful character. How does that affect the table? What about that? Well, I've talked about that before. I think min-maxing is all well and good. In fact, I have plenty of very powerful player characters at my table because my table has a really tough as nails game. That fits, but it's not going to fit everywhere, right? And even at my table, I'm sure there are some builds that would just shatter my pathetic little combats in two, and in that case, I would need to deal with that. You do need to find a table that fits your build, and the DM does have, in my opinion, the right, if they clarify it, the right to affect balance changes if it's becoming a serious issue. Because yet again, if other players feel like they're being left behind, if the DM feels stress due to balancing encounters, I think that is a legitimate problem. The important thing is to find a table that fits you. But beyond that, beyond legitimate min-maxing, let's move on to what we were actually talking about in this video, shifting things or creative rulings that greatly affect the balance of the game. I think a Dungeon Master should make rulings in the moment, yes or no decisions, in the moment during combat. And those rulings need to stick. They need to be honored. For example, in my own games, I had a player make a request of me. They were in a very narrow hallway fighting against a lot of zombies with the party, and that hallway was packed with both friends and foes. They could not Eldritch Blast a high priority target across the way because they couldn't see him. So, that player, they asked me if they could use their Satyr high jump to jump up and fire their Eldritch Blasts at that enemy across the way while they were still in the air. And you know what? I said yes. I thought it was a creative solution. The combat was also going on for a really long time, and I wanted to let the player do this. After which, I thought about it. Is the ability to shoot Eldritch Blasts mid-air using the Satyr high jump that I implemented in my own D&D revision, is that overpowered? I decided no. It used turn resources in order to make it happen. The player used turn resources in order to make it happen, and honestly, the amount of times they're in a tight hallway where that would be useful, the amount of times that happens is few and far between. So I decided, what the heck? I think the Satyr should be able to use the high jump to fire Eldritch Blast in midair. Now, that player is aware that in the future, I may change my mind on that. That is something that my players are always aware of. They're always aware that the patch notes of my games exist. And if something is underpowered or overpowered, I have the ability to have a discussion with the party and, as a Dungeon Master, affect change. That is something I clarify right at Session 0. I think that's something you should clarify at Session 0 as well if you want to take the same approach. However, if that player's high jump ability was for some reason overpowered, I could, in between sessions, decide what to do about it. And that's what I think you should do as well. In the moment, make your ruling. Decide how the spell is used, decide how the ability affects the game, and then in between your sessions, think about it. And more importantly, discuss with the other players. Talk to them about how this will affect the game. Ask them what their opinion is. Ask fellow Dungeon Masters online. The internet is such a powerful and amazing tool for getting help as a DM. I mean, seriously, I wouldn't be half as good at this gig if I didn't have people out there willing to help me out. More importantly, be wary of players who are unwilling to listen. If people are doing this in bad faith, that is a whole other problem. If somebody just wants to win all the combats and leave everyone behind in the dust, stressing you out with combat balance and not caring about how that affects you or anyone else, well, that sucks. That person's being kind of a dick, aren't they? Now, I'm not saying you should instantly kick over this, but I'm just saying that you should think about it. You should consider how this person is affecting your table. If they are becoming a legitimate issue, review their behavior and talk to them about it. Because if this kind of thing is in bad faith, that is a much bigger issue than anything we're talking about in this video. All in all, my point is, I think creative freedom, player agency, these are fundamental parts of the game. They need to be upheld. But if they're being used to make changes that make your time as a Dungeon Master unfun, or the other players, their time as players unfun, then it's not worth it. Creative freedom is important, but it's not more important than having fun while playing the game you're all playing together, right? So yeah, there you go. I really enjoyed this one. It's been a while since I had to take this clean. I mean, seriously, this recording is only like 15 minutes, which is not bad for an improv video, but in any case, if you guys enjoyed, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of our content, then you can check out our RPG Horror Story series, where we talk about the best of the worst of Dungeons & Dragons. And while you're there in the cards, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content right as it comes out. If you have any tips or thoughts, go down in the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment Creative Freedom to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.